You're just jealous he's better than you. My girlfriend laughed while defending her male best friend who constantly insulted me. They staged an intervention to humiliate me. I gave them a performance they'll never forget that burned their lives. Hey, Reddit. My girlfriend and her perfect best friend spent years treating me like I was the problem. So I said screw it, exposed every dirty secret they were hiding, and walked away. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. Before we get there, let me start from the beginning. I'm Alan, 32, fairly normal, gainfully employed, and 3 years deep into a relationship with a woman named Lillian. We met the usual way, mutual friends, too many drinks, a spark that turned into something real. Or at least I thought it was real. It took me far too long to notice that our relationship wasn't a duet. It was a trio. The third member was Oscar, Lillian's platonic soulmate, her best friend since college, and the self-appointed philosopher of our relationship. If I had $1 for every time she said, Oscar thinks, I could retire before 40. He had a comment on everything. The shirts I wore, the restaurants we chose, whether we should get a dog, even how often we should reassess our intimacy. It wasn't just unsolicited advice. It was a running commentary on my existence. And Lillian listened. Every time I disagreed with Oscar's opinions, she treated it like I was rejecting sacred scripture. He's just looking out for me, she'd say. You should appreciate that. Apparently, questioning why her best friend was critiquing the thread count of our bed sheets made me ungrateful. Oscar wasn't content to stay in the role of backseat driver. He'd appointed himself co-pilot, sliding insults under the radar disguised as concern. You're steady, Alan. Comfortable. Some people aim higher, but not everyone's wired that way. And Lillian? She repeated his lines like gospel. Oscar wasn't just part of our relationship. He was steering it. I told myself it wasn't worth a fight. I was building a life with Lillian, and Oscar was part of the package. But one night stripped away the last of my patience. It was a Saturday, one of those evenings Lillian insisted I spend bonding with Oscar. We ended up at a bar he liked, the kind where every drink costs as much as a car payment. Oscar had been drinking since before I arrived, and by the third round, his filter was gone. You ever wonder what it's like to cheat and not get caught? He asked, grinning. It's a rush. Alice thinks I'm at a conference in Denver. I was actually in a hotel 2 blocks from here, with Mia, from the PR team. Before I could react, he was unlocking his phone and shoving it into my hand. Videos of Oscar kissing another woman, half-dressed in a hotel room, photos in bed, champagne glasses on a balcony, evidence, not rumor. Now that's passion, he slurred. You wouldn't understand. You're not going to say anything, right? He asked suddenly, his drunk grin fading slightly. I mean, we're bros. What happens at the bar stays at the bar. I looked him dead in the eye. Of course not. I'm not going to say shit. That was all he needed to hear. The grin came back, wider than before. See? I knew you were cool. He fumbled with his phone. Here, I'm sending these to you. Don't show anyone, obviously. But you should see what a real affair looks like. Maybe it'll inspire you. He airdropped everything, every video, every picture, every screenshot of him bragging about it to someone else. So you can learn something, he said, laughing as the files transferred. He thought he was sharing a secret with a friend. What he was actually doing was handing me the detonator to his entire life. I should have deleted the files. Instead, I saved them. Every video, every picture, every detail. Backed them up. Encrypted them. For the first time since Oscar had inserted himself into my life, I wasn't angry. I was patient. People like Oscar think they're untouchable. They believe they can insult you in your own home, undermine your relationship, humiliate your existence, and walk away without consequence. But every man has a line, and Oscar had just crossed mine while handing me the detonator. I paid the tab, helped him into a cab, and said nothing. Lillian texted me later to ask if we had fun. I replied, of course we had. I wasn't sure when or how I'd use that, but I knew this much. One day, Oscar's arrogance would come back to bite him, and when that day came, I'd be ready to watch him choke on it. Oscar's arrogance didn't stop after that night at the bar. It grew. The more Lillian listened to him, the bolder he became. He stopped hiding his contempt for me altogether. If we talked about moving in together permanently, he'd casually suggest Lillian should think about whether this is really what she wants. If I mentioned saving for a trip, he'd say, you don't want to tie yourself down too early. Every comment was a small, calculated jab. One afternoon, I heard keys in the lock. Oscar strolled in like he paid the rent, grabbed a drink from the fridge, stretched out on the couch. When did you get a key? I asked. He shrugged. Lillian gave it to me last year, for emergencies. You don't mind, right? I minded. But he was already comfortable, and Lillian had clearly approved this without asking me. That night, I told her it needed to stop. I don't want him using the key anymore. She exploded. You're trying to control me. This is about your insecurity, not Oscar. If you trusted me, you wouldn't care. It's about boundaries, I said calmly. You're jealous because he's confident. Admit it. She stormed into the bedroom. I slept on the couch. A few days later, Lillian delivered the real blow. We're going to have a little get-together this weekend, she announced over breakfast. Just you, me, Oscar, and a few friends. I think it's time we talk about this jealousy issue properly. I stared at her. You're staging an intervention? It's not an intervention, she said, which of course meant it was. It's a conversation. Everyone will share their perspective. I think it'll help you understand how much you're hurting this relationship. I agreed. I even thanked her for organizing it. Inside, I was already planning how to make the most of what was coming. The conversation was scheduled for Saturday evening. By the time I arrived, Oscar was already there, leaning against the kitchen counter with a drink and the smug smile of someone who believed they were untouchable. 3 of Lillian's friends were seated in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, rehearsed, like they'd been prepped in advance. We started with polite small talk before Lillian clapped her hands and said, "Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room." Tskir. The next hour was an exercise in humiliation. One friend explained that trust is the foundation of every healthy relationship, and that my issues with Oscar were rooted in insecurity. Another said that I shouldn't try to change Lillian's friendships. A third suggested therapy, for me, of course. Oscar waited until last. He stood up, holding his drink like he was about to deliver a TED Talk. I've known Lillian for over a decade, he began. We've always supported each other. Our friendship is built on honesty and loyalty. I would never come between her and someone she loves. He paused dramatically. But love should be about trust, Alan. And if you can't trust her with me, maybe the problem isn't me. The applause from the others was silent, but it was there. Lillian beamed, glowing with satisfaction. Then she delivered the final punch. Oscar has always been the most important person in my life. She stopped herself, caught the look on my face, and amended. One of the most important people. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, something clicked into place. This wasn't just about jealousy. This was about control. Theirs, not mine. They wanted me to accept a dynamic where Oscar could treat me like an inconvenience in my own life, and Lillian would back him up every time. I apologized. I said I'd reflect on everything and try to do better. Lillian squeezed my hand, believing she'd won. Oscar gave me a self-satisfied nod, like a teacher pleased with a student's progress. But as I looked around that room, at their smug faces, their certainty that they'd put me in my place, I realized something important. They'd just handed me exactly what I needed. They thought they'd broken me down. What they'd actually done was give me permission to go further than I ever planned to. That night, as we drove home, Lillian talked about how productive the conversation had been. I listened, nodded, and smiled. Outwardly, I was the picture of contrition. Inside, the plan was already forming. They wanted a performance? Fine. I'd give them one. But when the curtain fell, none of them would be applauding. 2 days later, over dinner, I told Lillian I wanted to fix things. Her eyes lit up immediately. I want to clear the air with everyone, I said. Maybe we could have a small dinner. Me, you, Oscar, and Alice. She practically glowed. That's a great idea. It was all theater. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was building a trap. While they thought I was preparing an apology, I was preparing evidence. By midweek, the plan was airtight. That's when Lillian started to unravel. She'd expected me to fight. Instead, I was calm, agreeable, almost cheerful. It freaked her out. She knew me well enough to recognize when something was wrong. Her paranoia boiled over. She checked my phone, scrolled through my emails, grilled me about coworkers. She made fake social media accounts to test if I'd flirt with strangers. She showed up at my office unannounced. Once, she appeared crying in the parking lot. My manager saw her and asked if everything was okay. I said it was. It wasn't. I stopped reacting. Her accusations bounced off me. Meanwhile, the social circle around us started shrinking. Friends stopped texting. Even those who sympathized with Lillian seemed wary of how erratic she'd become. I let her believe things were improving. I nodded when she talked about healing and rebuilding trust. When she told me she'd invited 2 mutual friends to the dinner so they could see how much progress we were making, I told her it was a great idea. The more people there, the better. By Friday, she was convinced we were turning a corner. This dinner is going to be good for us, she said with a smile. Oscar's excited. He says it's a fresh start. Yeah, I said, matching her smile. Fresh start. That night, I packed my bag for Saturday. Laptop, HDMI adapter, backup phone, USB drive, all loaded. I checked the files twice and rehearsed the sequence in my head. Everything had to be clean and undeniable. This wasn't about pettiness anymore. Oscar's arrogance had gone unchecked for too long. Lillian's manipulations had twisted every boundary into a flaw. They had spent years convincing themselves they were untouchable. Saturday would remind them how wrong they were. As we went to bed, Lillian talked excitedly about how healing the night would be. She had no idea what was coming. She thought I was preparing an apology. I was preparing a reckoning. By the time I turned off the light, every detail was set. The dinner was my idea. The guest list was theirs. The stage belonged to Oscar and Lillian. But the script? That was mine. And when the curtain rose, no one would be ready for the performance I had planned. Saturday evening came faster than I expected. Lillian was buzzing with excitement as she got ready, like a kid on Christmas Eve. She called the night a new chapter, and kept thanking me for being mature enough to make peace. I smiled, zipped my jacket, and slid the USB drive into the inside pocket. The chapter she was about to read would be nothing like the one she imagined. We arrived just before 7. Oscar answered the door wearing that insufferable smirk. He clapped me on the shoulder like welcoming a defeated opponent back to the ring. Alice was warm and polite. Lillian's 2 friends were already there, sipping wine. The atmosphere was painfully optimistic. Everyone expected closure, maybe even a toast. We had dinner. Small talk filled the room, each sentence a performance. Oscar bragged about a recent project at work. Lillian laughed too hard at his jokes, and Alice nodded along, oblivious to the time bomb ticking under her roof. I played my part too, polite, measured, even self-effacing. If anyone had doubts about my sincerity, I erased them before dessert. Then Lillian tapped her glass. Alan wanted to say something, she announced proudly, squeezing my hand as if this were a graduation speech. All eyes turned to me. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make them lean in. I want to thank everyone for being here, I began. The last few weeks haven't been easy, and I want to own my part in that. Oscar grinned, leaning back like a king watching his subjects kneel. Takes a big man to admit that. Right, I said evenly. And I think it's time I stop avoiding the truth. But before I say anything else, there's someone here who deserves to hear it more than anyone. I turned to Alice. Confusion flickered in her eyes. Oscar shifted in his seat. Alice, I said clearly, I owe you the truth. Before anyone could interrupt, I pulled out my phone and connected it to the TV. The screen lit up. Then came the first video. Oscar, drunk and shirtless, kissing a woman in a hotel room. Another clip. Different night, same woman, same room. A photo followed. Champagne glasses, hands intertwined. A balcony view. Alice's face drained of color. Lillian shot to her feet. This is fake, she shouted. He's trying to humiliate you. I ignored her and continued. A new slide appeared. Screenshots of Oscar's texts bragging about his affair. She has no idea. I'm untouchable. Thanks for keeping quiet. And then, the kicker. Thanks, man. I owe you. Let's never talk about this again. The room froze. Alice stared at the screen in silence. One of Lillian's friends covered her mouth. Oscar's smug expression was gone, replaced by something pale and twitching. You son of a... Oscar shot up so fast his chair toppled over. He lunged across the room toward me, hands reaching for my phone. I saw it coming. Guys who lose their temper always telegraph their moves. I sidestepped, and he crashed into the chair I'd been sitting in. He caught himself on the table, swearing, then came at me again. This time, I didn't move. I planted my feet and shoved him back, hard. He stumbled, slammed into the edge of the dining table, and knocked over 2 glasses. One shattered on the floor. Sit down, I said, voice calm but sharp. Oscar didn't listen. Rage twisted his face as he swung at me, a clumsy, furious punch. I blocked it with my forearm and drove my shoulder into his chest, pushing him back again. This time he crashed into the wall, gasping. Don't, I warned. Not here. Not tonight. The room was chaos now. Lillian screaming for me to stop, one friend yelling for someone to call the police, Alice frozen and silent. Oscar tried to push forward again, but his movements were sloppy. I stepped aside and let him stumble past me, then shoved him down into the chair he'd knocked over moments earlier. This is what he does when he's cornered, I said, brushing my jacket straight. Blames someone else. Gets violent. Tries to make the problem go away by force. But this time, Oscar, you're not walking away from it. Oscar's chest heaved. He looked less like a threat now, and more like a man who just realized his entire life was on fire. Alice stood abruptly. tears streaking down her cheeks. She stared at the screen for another moment, then at Oscar, really looked at him, like she was seeing him for the first time. Without a word, she turned and walked upstairs. The bedroom door slammed so hard the walls shook. Then came the sound of drawers being yanked open, things hitting the floor, a muffled scream of rage from behind the closed door. Oscar's face went white. "Alice," he started, moving toward the stairs. "Don't," I said quietly. He stopped. Lillian was still screaming at me, but I wasn't listening. My eyes stayed on that closed bedroom door upstairs. Alice wasn't running. She was regrouping. And that was so much worse for Oscar than any tantrum could ever be. Lillian turned on me, voice shaking with fury. "You're disgusting! You ruined lives tonight." "No," I said, staring at her. "Oscar did that. I just stopped helping him hide it." Oscar slumped in his chair, face buried in his hands. Lillian shouted something else. I didn't catch it. The room was too loud now, filled with yelling, accusations, panic. The friends who had come for a reconciliation were frozen in disbelief, unsure if they should stay or run. I looked around one final time. "I think we're done here," I said. "Thanks for dinner." I walked to the door as Lillian's voice cracked behind me. Oscar didn't move. Nobody followed. The night air outside was cold and still, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. I felt no satisfaction, no gloating, just a deep, steady calm. They'd invited me here expecting a performance of regret. Instead, they'd witnessed a reckoning, one that left their carefully constructed lies shattered on the floor. And as I walked toward my car, the image of Oscar gasping against the wall replayed in my mind. It wasn't the fight I'd planned, but it proved what I'd always known. When the mask slips, the powerful always flail. And I had made sure everyone saw it happen. The morning after the dinner was silent. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from something broken beyond repair. Lillian barely slept. She paced the apartment for hours, alternating between bursts of angry muttering and long stretches of blank staring at the floor. By sunrise, I knew a conversation was coming. She started before I'd even poured my coffee. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway. Her voice was sharp, trembling with fury. "You humiliated me! You humiliated everyone." I took a slow sip before answering. "No, Oscar humiliated himself. I just turned the lights on." "That was supposed to be a reconciliation," she snapped. "You planned that. You trapped us." "You're right," I said. "I planned it. I was done playing defense." She laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "This is insane. You blew up our entire lives because your ego couldn't handle that I have a best friend." "No," I said calmly, setting my cup down. "I blew up a lie that's been poisoning this relationship from the start. Oscar isn't just your friend. He's the guy who's been undermining me for 3 years. He's the guy who cheated on his wife and bragged about it. And you? You stood next to him and acted like I was the problem. That's not fair." "It's not." I stepped closer, meeting her glare. "You defended a man who walked into our apartment without knocking, who told you I wasn't ambitious enough, who tried to control every part of our lives. And when I asked for a basic boundary, you staged an intervention to fix me." Her face flushed red. "I was trying to help you." "No," I said, my voice flat. "You were trying to break me into something Oscar approved of. And the second I didn't cooperate, I became the villain." She crossed her arms. "You didn't have to do it like that. You could have told Alice privately. And then you and Oscar would have convinced everyone I made it up." I gestured toward the hallway where her raised voice still echoed. "You're proving my point right now." She went quiet for a moment, breathing hard, then shifted tactics. "We can fix this," she said softly. "We can move past it. You went too far, but I know why. It's because you love me, and I love you too. We just lost perspective." I almost laughed. "Perspective? You watched your best friend try to hit me last night after I showed his wife proof he'd been cheating on her. And your first reaction wasn't 'I'm sorry,' it was 'you're disgusting.'" Her composure cracked. "Because you humiliated me," she shouted. "In front of my friends. In front of Alice. You made me look like a fool. You did that to yourself," I said simply. The words landed harder than I expected. Her eyes glassed over with frustrated tears. "So that's it? You're just walking away? After everything?" "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what I'm doing." She stared at me like she hadn't heard me correctly. "You're ending this?" "I'm giving you 4 weeks," I said flatly. "Pack your things, find a place, and get out. After that, the locks change whether you're gone or not." Her mouth fell open. 4 weeks? You're kicking me out of our apartment." "My apartment," I corrected. "My name's on the lease. You moved in. Now you're moving out." 4 weeks is generous considering what you've put me through. For a second, she looked like she might cry. Then she straightened, anger taking over again. You'll regret this, she hissed. You're throwing away the best thing you'll ever have. The conversation ended there. She slammed the bedroom door so hard a picture fell off the wall. I left for a drive, letting the cold air clear my head. When I came back, she'd started packing. It was early October when I gave her the deadline. The dinner had happened on the first Saturday of the month. By mid-October, barely 2 weeks later, I heard from a mutual friend that she'd been spotted with Oscar at a cafe. The days that followed were chaos in slow motion. Lillian didn't accept the breakup. Not really. She texted nonstop. First came the apologies, then the accusations. You ruined everything. You embarrassed me. I hate you. I miss you. Please talk to me. The messages swung wildly between anger and desperation. I ignored them all. When texts didn't work, she showed up at my office with pastries and fake smiles. I told security she wasn't allowed up anymore. When that failed, she tried to weaponize pity, sending mutual friends long messages about how I had snapped and gone too far. I replied to each with the video of Oscar and the text that followed. The messages stopped almost immediately. The smear campaign came next. She posted cryptic stories about narcissists and emotional abuse, careful never to use my name but obvious enough that people knew. I didn't respond. Screenshots circulated on their own, and her credibility eroded with each denial. Meanwhile, Oscar was in free fall. Word of the video spread fast. By the end of the week, half their social circle had seen it. At work, people whispered behind his back. Alice went silent, which was more telling than any statement. Silence meant preparation. Lawyers, bank accounts, evidence. Lillian's behavior grew erratic. One day she was sobbing on the phone, promising therapy and change. The next, she was outside my building screaming that I'd ruined her life. Once, she left a handwritten letter on my doorstep about how our love story isn't over. I shredded it without reading the second page. By the third week, the apartment was half empty. Not because she was cooperating, but because she was too busy spiraling to pack properly. I stayed with a friend to avoid the late-night drama. When I returned, she'd left notes around the place, ranging from, "You'll regret this," to "We belong together." And they went straight into the trash. The night before her deadline, she made one last attempt. She showed up at my door, makeup streaked, eyes red. "Please," she whispered, "we can fix this. Don't throw us away." I looked her in the eye and spoke evenly. "I'm not throwing anything away, Lillian. It's already gone, and you were the one who burned it." She didn't answer. She just stared for a moment, then turned and walked down the hall. The next morning, she was gone. The keys were on the counter, the closet was empty, and the apartment was finally silent. 2 days later, I got an email from HR. Lillian had filed a complaint claiming I'd been emotionally abusive and exhibited troubling anger issues. The complaint included vague accusations about my tone during arguments and a claim that I'd made her feel unsafe. I met with HR that afternoon. I brought my phone. I showed them the texts, her erratic messages, her threats, her showing up at my office unannounced multiple times. I explained the breakup, the intervention, the dinner. I kept it factual. The HR rep took notes, thanked me for my cooperation, and closed the meeting. A week later, I got an email. After reviewing the submitted information, we've determined no policy violations occurred. This matter is closed. Lillian's final attempt at control had failed, just like everything else. It wasn't peace. Not yet, but it was the first real step toward it. And as for Oscar and Alice, the reckoning that had started in that living room was about to get much worse. It didn't take long for Lillian and Oscar to find each other again. Two people with the same bruised egos and matching grudges will always orbit back toward each other. Within 2 weeks of the dinner, a mutual friend sent me a photo of them sitting at a cafe, faces tense and shoulders close. The caption underneath said it all. They deserve each other. By the time Lillian's move-out deadline hit at the end of October, they were already living together. It was almost poetic. The two people who had spent years trying to control me, now trying to build a life out of the wreckage they'd created. They posted a photo of their new apartment on social media with matching mugs and a caption about new beginnings. I didn't react. I knew better. At first, they tried rewriting history. In their version, I had snapped from jealousy and faked evidence to ruin their friendship. Oscar insisted the videos were taken out of context. Lillian claimed I had hacked his phone. It was pointless. The proof was out there, and people weren't stupid. The harder they denied, the more desperate they looked. Oscar's real punishment came from Alice. She moved quietly but fast. With the evidence stacked against him, the divorce was swift and decisive. She got the house, a significant portion of his savings, and, in a final, brutal detail, custody of their cat. Oscar was left renting a small, overpriced apartment on the edge of town, juggling alimony payments and legal fees. The man who used to brag about being untouchable was now comparing grocery prices and calculating if he could afford takeout. His career wasn't spared either. His company reassigned him to a background role to reduce client exposure, which was corporate speak for, "We don't want your face near our brand." Invitations to industry events stopped coming. Colleagues stopped lingering around his desk. He started working from home more often, not because he wanted to, but because the office had become hostile territory. Lillian's downfall wasn't as dramatic, but it was just as steady. Her long rants online about healing from narcissistic abuse backfired. Potential employers saw the mess and quietly passed on hiring her. She eventually landed a junior PR role, a steep fall from the position she used to brag about aiming for. The job barely covered her share of rent, and the resentment started building. Their social circle collapsed around them. Friends stopped inviting them to dinners. The people who once called their friendship inspirational now avoided their names altogether. Even the ones who stayed in contact kept their distance, tired of the constant drama. It turns out that when you build your identity on judgment and arrogance, people aren't eager to stick around when you're exposed. The fight started soon after they moved in. At first, they were small, arguments over chores, groceries, and late-night phone calls. Then they got louder. Neighbors started hearing shouting through the walls. One of them told a mutual friend about a night when the police were called after an argument spilled into the hallway. It was the same routine they'd inflicted on everyone else, now turned inward. Oscar blamed Lillian for not defending him when people confronted him. Lillian blamed Oscar for ruining her reputation. They accused each other of cheating, of not putting in effort, of being manipulative. The same tactics they had used to control me and lie to Alice were now being used on each other. And without an outsider to absorb the damage, they destroyed themselves. Occasionally, they tried to reach out. One night at 2 a.m., Lillian texted me, "I thought we could talk. Things haven't been easy." I deleted it without responding. A week later, Oscar sent a message. "We both said things we regret. Maybe we should clear the air?" I didn't reply to that either. More messages followed, some furious, some apologetic. Lillian accused me of being petty. Oscar tried guilt-tripping me with lines about how friends don't stay enemies forever. They didn't seem to realize I had no interest in being their friend. Not again, not ever. Their relationship kept unraveling. They unfollowed each other online, then followed again. Broke up, got back together, repeated the cycle. The building's residents knew them as that couple, the ones screaming at each other in the hallways, accusing each other of cheating, calling the cops, and then posting smiling selfies the next day. It was poetic justice. They had spent years projecting their dysfunction onto others. Now, stripped of scapegoats, they turned it inward. Every manipulative trick, every toxic habit, every attempt at control was now bouncing back and forth between them like a weapon they couldn't put down. The final implosion was inevitable. A particularly violent fight, involving a smashed phone, a broken lamp, and another police visit, ended with them splitting for a break. Oscar moved into a smaller apartment across town. Lillian packed what she could and returned to her parents' house. From that point, their lives drifted apart completely. Oscar remained a ghost at work, a shadow of the man he used to present himself as. Lillian faded into social media obscurity, posting vague quotes about healing and finding herself. Neither of them had friends left willing to listen. People sometimes ask if I feel sorry for them. The answer is no. They built this mess themselves, brick by brick, lie by lie, betrayal by betrayal. They chose arrogance over humility, manipulation over honesty, and selfishness over respect. And now they're choking on the consequences. Their downfall isn't satisfying in the cinematic way. It's not a dramatic explosion. It's slower, uglier, like watching a structure rot from the inside until it collapses under its own weight. And maybe that's the most fitting punishment of all. Because in the end, they didn't just ruin their relationships. They ruined each other. And I didn't have to lift a finger. By the time spring rolled around, the chaos had burned itself out. Lillian was back at her parents' house, posting filtered photos with long captions about growth. Oscar was renting a dingy apartment on the other side of town, keeping his head down and avoiding anyone who had seen the video, which was practically everyone. Their lives were reduced to quiet damage control. Mine was finally free of both of them. The apartment felt different now. Clean. Still. The constant tension that used to hang in the air was gone. I replaced the locks, repainted the living room, and rearranged the furniture. Small things, but each one a reminder that this space was mine again. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even thinking about revenge. I was focused on rebuilding something better from the ground up. Work picked up. My performance improved. I had more energy, more focus, more time. I joined a gym, reconnected with a few old friends I'd neglected, and started spending weekends hiking or exploring the city instead of arguing about Oscar's opinions or Lillian's drama. For the first time in years, my life felt like it belonged to me. About 3 months after the dinner, I got an email from Alice. Short, polite. Thank you again for telling me the truth. I'm doing better now. I hope you are too. I read it twice before replying. I'm glad you're doing well. I am too. If you ever want to talk, I'd be happy to. She responded a few hours later. Coffee sometime? We met at a small cafe downtown the following week. It was awkward at first, not because of what had happened, but because neither of us knew how to talk without mentioning it. We stuck to small things, work, books, weekend plans, but it felt easy, natural, like two people who understood each other without needing to explain everything. That first coffee turned into a second one a week later, then lunch, then dinner. It was never rushed and never dramatic. We didn't talk about what this was or where it was going. We just enjoyed the quiet honesty of it. Two people who had been lied to enough times to know the value of simple truth. Look, I know how this sounds. Guy exposes his girlfriend's best friend, breaks up with her, and 3 months later he's dating the best friend's ex-wife? It's the kind of thing that'd get torn apart in the comments if someone else posted it. Too convenient. Sounds fake. Nobody recovers that fast. But here's the thing. We weren't recovering fast. We were recovering together. And there's a difference. Neither of us was looking for a rebound. We'd both been lied to, manipulated, gaslit by the same two people. We understood each other in a way nobody else could. It wasn't about jumping into something new. It was about finally being around someone who didn't need an explanation for why we'd drawn the lines we did. Alice was different now. Steadier, more grounded. The betrayal had hurt her, but it hadn't broken her. She was rebuilding too, and we often talked about the strange sense of clarity that comes when you finally stop tolerating disrespect. I never once brought up Oscar, and she never asked about Lillian. We both understood those parts of our lives were finished chapters. What mattered was that we'd both chosen to close them. Sometimes we'd laugh about how surreal it all felt. Two people who had been betrayed by the same pair of people, now sitting across from each other, sharing stories over dinner. But there was something deeper underneath the irony, a shared understanding that made every conversation feel real. One night after dinner, as we walked back to our cars, Alice stopped and looked at me. I'm not looking for anything complicated, she said. I just want honesty. That's all I care about now. That's all I care about too, I replied. And I meant it. Things grew from there, slowly, cautiously. We spent more time together. She introduced me to a few of her friends. I invited her to a game night with mine. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something steadier, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and an unspoken promise to never repeat the mistakes that had scarred us both. I don't know what the future holds for us. Maybe it turns into something serious. Maybe it doesn't. But whatever happens, it's built on truth, and that's enough. Looking back, Lillian once told me she wanted me to show humility by apologizing to Oscar. She wanted me on my knees, humiliated, small. But the only people who ended up kneeling were the two who believed they were untouchable. Oscar lost everything: his marriage, his home, his money, his reputation. Lillian lost her relationship, her credibility, her future plans. And all I lost was the illusion that I had to accept disrespect to keep the peace. The night I changed the locks, I stood in the doorway for a long time before closing it. The apartment was empty and silent, but it wasn't loneliness I felt. It was peace. Real peace. The kind that comes only after you've torn something rotten out of your life and left space for something new to grow. And as strange as it still feels to admit it, I'm grateful. Not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced on me. Because without it, I might never have drawn the line. And without drawing the line, I might never have discovered what life could look like on the other side of it. Whatever happens next, it'll be honest. It'll be real. And it will never again include people who confuse love with control. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.